Uh, Mr. S.Y. Siddiqui, who has been for 40 years involved in the corporate sector, grooming talent, grooming HR, human resources at various levels. And today he's the executive editor for Maruti Suzuki. He has been earlier the executive director of HR as well in Maruti Suzuki. And he has been involved in several other companies before Maruti Suzuki, like Escorts, DCM Group, Benetton, New Holland Tractors. But Maruti Suzuki can never forget him for the long service in developing human resources, in developing talent, acquiring and grooming talent that they have been doing. He is a right person to speak about how the industry and the academics can integrate, having led Maruti Suzuki's HR for a very long time. Over to you, Siddiqui Saab. You've been waiting for long.
Thank
Siddiqui
you
Saab.
very much, Professor Ujjwal Chaudhary. And I'm very, very privileged. Thank you, Akram San, for making me part of this very, very inspirational kind of conference and session. Dr. Vinod Chaudhary, Mr. Dilip Chunoy, long, friend. So great to see you there. Dr. Maitri, our other eminent panelists. Very, very privileged to be here. And I think the subject is also where perhaps Maruti has made its small contribution for sure. When I look at today in this context, the potential strength of our country for future, and Dr. Chaudhary started with a kind of a good background, and then perhaps it is inspiring for all of us to really share our thoughts. Today, perhaps when we look at our country, it is one of recognized as one of the most exciting emerging economies next only to China. And perhaps while we see other major economies, I think either they are stagnating or just managing a very, very flat, tough growth. And one of the biggest advantages, what Professor Chaudhary earlier mentioned, is that India has the availability of a large young, active young population, almost 17.5% of the world total work age population. An exception strength compared to see maybe Japan, an aging population, Europe, an aging population. Also, very shortly, China will get into that loop of aging. Perhaps when we look at the emergence of the service sector leading the charge in the Indian growth experience, maybe the boom of the IT industry, but manufacturing remains a very, very strong option always, and maybe looking at emerging other sectors in the country. That kind of capability to diversify, create that growth opportunity and employability. Perhaps we are looking at this very strong domestic demand, consumption potential, which is making us self-sufficient to that extent. And perhaps last but not the least, what great contribution Dilip did with the National Skills Corporation, and Professor Chaudhary mentioned about that. We were part of that journey, and we witnessed that kind of a huge, huge transition badly required in the country. So big, big, big advantage. Perhaps when I'm looking at this need for industry and academia collaboration, I think a kind of a partnership which can build people capability for a better tomorrow. That's a very strong thinking in the minds of most of us when we discuss at the board level at Maruti. And there, somewhere, perhaps we are still finding a kind of a vacuum, unfortunately, which we need to look at. One perspective, Professor Chaudhary, which is important in my thinking is keeping pace with the changes in the business environment. That pace is going up and up and up and very, very fast now. Perhaps in our case, moving to electric vehicles is a huge challenge. But to a great extent, 2030 is the kind of milestone we are looking at, really being there. And then the key question comes is where do we find electric vehicle engineers? Japan has a shortage. We have a shortage. Nobody has looked at it 5, 7 years, 10 years ago. That's the kind of, a little issue in my mind is that why we are so much behind when we are looking at artificial intelligence, we are looking at maybe robotics, we are looking at machine learning, bots. Now we are reacting, whereas we should have reacted maybe a little earlier, maybe 7, 10 years earlier. We are looking at startup companies, even non-graduates creating out-of-box business models, outstanding success. Dr. Chaudhary mentioned about his journey and inspired many of us listening to him. I think somewhere we need to be taking into context this kind of potential also and look at this soft skill focus, which was mentioned by our earlier speakers as well. Maybe in case of this change and resistance to change, this comfort zone, and Maruti is a great example that with our arena channel, we're selling so many, huge, maybe more than kind of 10 lakh cars, but we thought of introducing Nexa, challenging our own existing, arena model. But then now Nexa is a kind of a huge benchmark of success in terms of auto industry in India. Perhaps when we are looking at our contribution directly to skilling, 30 ITI is being directly managed by Maruti in a very, very different way, where the focus is more on this learning from Japan and learning on soft skills, building up a kind of a character of an industrial worker, not only skilling, but also the soft skills. To a great extent, maybe we are looking at a kind of a perspective that maybe the startups need mentoring. So we have started a new initiative of mobility in terms of automotive industry, bringing in this entrepreneurial kind of capability. So we are at the moment mentoring and assisting 14 such startups, part of Maruti's new initiative in the last 2 years. To a great extent, perhaps academia will have to look at how they are going to prepare to respond to this kind of a volatile and kind of speed pace of change, in my thinking. Maybe some introspection. Maybe we'll have to look at our existing conventional education models. And Dilip was talking about some of those changes towards skilling part, maybe short-term programs. I think we'll have to look at a 360-degree perspective for this kind of a transformation. Perhaps when we are looking at the kind of you know both industry as well as academia, some key perspectives. In my thinking, maybe an institutionalized structure can help, maybe supported by FICCI, by CII, by ASSOCHAM, and somewhere some body of academia can perhaps represent that kind of interest. And maybe on both the fronts, starting with academia, first they will have to selectively delete the past. Very tough, to come out of that comfort zone. But I think that will be the first basic essential prerequisite. And to a great extent, create a balance between our education in terms of theory, allied research, and maybe education, which is more relevant to the dynamic industry requirements. And at the same time, perhaps when we are looking at the corporate side, the industry side, I think they would need to transition from self-reliance to exploring a third eye perspective, exploring the learning capacity which academia can, complement in a big way. Maybe live projects, as Dilip was mentioning, and maybe looking at this continuous need for reskilling, upskilling, and maybe multi-skilling instead of being directly taken as a secondary load by industry can be given to a trusted partner in the academia. To a great extent, perhaps when we are looking at some such development in the overall kind of ecosystem, I have one small personal kind of interest to share here. When we are looking at B schools, engineering colleges, and the kind of university education, I think one big learning from Japan, which is very close to my heart, is that we should also look at building character somewhere, and somewhere looking at ethics perspective, you know training people, youngsters in B schools and other kind of universities and colleges, just to have aspirations on the monetary front, very competitive kind of a rat race. I think we should get rid of that kind of a concept. Maybe look at first building the ethical perspective, the integrity, the governance perspective, this capability to be able to also contribute to the larger society, and then can look at perhaps doing well in terms of their careers. To a great extent, somewhere, I think industry has been lacking. But at the same time, somewhere, I think academia has been more in their comfort zone. I think some little initiative of maybe creating an institutionalized structure will be the first small step towards this long journey. I'm very, very privileged to be part of this conference. We'll be very happy to answer any questions. And I will stop here. Professor Chaudhary, back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Siddiqui Saab.